The hall was enormous. Cold. The kind of cold that lived in stone and didn't care about you. Severac stood at the edge of the observation balcony and watched the humans walk in. There were 6 of them. They came through the tall doors at the far end of the assembly hall, escorted by 2 Velhari honor guards who stood nearly twice their height. The guard shells caught the light. Smooth, dark blue, beautiful in the way that old, dangerous things are beautiful. The humans looked small next to them. They also, Severac noted, brought food. One of the females, she had dark skin and sharp eyes and moved like she was already 3 steps ahead of whatever came next, was carrying a wide flat container. She set it on the welcome table near the door. She lifted the lid. Steam rose. Something round and golden brown sat in neat rows inside. An Orvani delegate near Severac leaned close. A submission offering, it said. Classic prey appeasement. Severac wrote that down. He had been studying these creatures for 11 weeks before today. He had read everything the assemblies preliminary teams had sent back. 2 eyes facing forward, predator configuration, all the models agreed. Omnivorous diet, bilateral symmetry, warm-blooded, social. They came from a single planet called Earth, which was, by all ecological measurements, one of the most lethal environments in the known galaxy. And yet, they had brought baked goods. The male at the front of the group was the one called Cole Briggs. He was the military liaison, the first contact bridge between human government and the Galactic Assembly. He was not tall. He was not large. He had brown hair going gray at the edges and a face that didn't give much away. He walked slowly, not nervous, not performing, just walking the way a man walks when he has nowhere else to be, in no particular hurry to get there. He looked around the assembly hall with the same expression a person uses when they're checking if the weather has changed. Severac kept watching. The session began on schedule. The assembly protocols were long and careful. They always were for first contact classifications. Each species entering the galactic community had to be observed, measured, and placed into one of the established categories. The categories had been built over 800 years of contact events. They covered everything: apex predators, territorial grazers, colonial hive, species, symbiotic pairs, neutral, omnivores. The classification mattered. It determined where a species sat in assembly law, what rights they received, what restrictions. Severac was the lead xenobiologist on the human file. His job was to present his preliminary findings and recommend a category. He had prepared carefully. The formal session was polite and slow. Delegates from 40 species sat in their assigned positions around the tiered floor. Translators ran through earpieces and throat-mounted speakers. The humans sat in the visitor section. 6 chairs along the lower left tier. A small table, a water dispenser that ran cold because nobody had thought to ask what temperature they preferred. Colbriggs sat in the middle chair. He didn't slouch. He didn't fidget. He sat the way a person sits when they're used to waiting. The female with the food container, Vera Osai, the xenolinguist, sat to his left. She had a small writing device in her hand and she was using it constantly, noting things, flagging things. Her eyes moved around the room like she was reading it, like the room was a text she was working through for meaning. Severak found her interesting in a way. Couldn't quite name yet. He put a note next to her entry in his file: high observational awareness, atypical for submissive species. He moved on. The third notable human was not in the visitor section. He was in the gallery above the elevated observation ring where non-speaking attendees sat. His name was Owen Daly. He was listed as an admiral, which was a human military rank of significant authority. He had gray hair and a straight back, and he had not moved in 2 hours. Severak's instruments were good. He ran them across the gallery row as a matter of habit. There was a small spike in ambient stress readings, not large, not connected to any visible event. It tracked to the section of gallery where Daly sat. Severak checked his equipment twice. Nothing wrong with it. He wrote the reading into his log and marked it probable sensor drift. Then he moved to the next column. The session broke for a mid-period recess. The human delegation stood and stretched, a very physical species, clearly uncomfortable with long stillness. Vera As walked to the welcome table and cut one of the golden brown items into smaller pieces and ate one. She offered a piece to the Vilhari honor guard nearest the table. The guard did not know what to do with this. It took the piece. Kolbrigg drifted to the edge of the visitor section and stood looking out at the empty assembly floor. He had his hands in his pockets. He was completely still now, which was different from the way he had been still before. Before, it was comfortable. This was something else. Severak watched him and couldn't find the word for it in any of the 7 languages he spoke fluently. The session resumed. The recess had been 15 minutes. Severak presented his findings. He was thorough. He always was. He laid out the biological markers. First, forward-facing eyes, yes, but social bonding of extreme depth, more consistent with prey species herd structures than with solitary apex hunters. Diet omnivorous, heavily weighted toward cultivated plant material, again, not the profile of an apex predator. Aggression index low in baseline. Social interaction, stress response atypically mild. The humans showed little visible response even in unfamiliar environments, which could be read as confidence but could also be read as the absence of a threat recognition system tuned finely enough to register the assembly hall as something to be cautious about. The smiling was the thing that had bothered him most early on. Every predator species Severak had ever cataloged used facial display as threat behavior. The Krethva showed teeth to claim territory. The Salamani flared their neck frills before a strike. Even the Velhari, his own people, widened their eye clusters when marking danger. Humans smiled constantly. They smiled at each other. They smiled at strangers. Kolbriggs had smiled at the Orvani delegate who outweighed him by 300 kg, and the smile had produced no threat response in either of them. The Orvani had smiled back badly with the approximated expression of a species that didn't have the right face for it, but was trying to be polite. Severak had watched this and put it in his notes. Smile appears to function as signal, not threat display. He presented this to the assembly. The room received it well. The category recommendation came at the End neutral omnivore, social bonding. Emphasis, low aggression index. It passed. The humans were officially classified. Severac felt the satisfaction of a job done cleanly. He closed his presentation file. Around the hall, delegates began the quiet motion of ending a session, moving papers, adjusting devices, preparing to leave. He glanced at the visitor section. Vera Alce was reading something on her small device. She tilted it so Cole could see. Cole read it. He didn't react for a moment. Then he said something. Quiet. Severac was too far away to hear it. Through the ambient noise of the hall, Vera set the device down on her knee. She said something back. Severac's translator, catching the edge of it at maximum sensitivity, returned. 3 words. Read the room, she said. He did not know what room she meant. He did not know yet that she meant this one, that she meant all of them, that she had been reading it since the moment she walked in and had found the same thing in it that Cole had found, which was a category built by species that had never once had to be the most dangerous thing in the room. He went home and started writing his report. He was thorough. He was careful. He was wrong about almost everything that mattered. The ship was called the Arden Meridian. It was a joint research vessel, half Vel Hari design, half adapted for human use, which meant one half of it smelled like recycled mineral air and the other half smelled like coffee. The coffee smell spread. Severac had been aboard for 6 weeks when he stopped noticing it. He was not sure if this was adaptation or defeat. The study protocol was straightforward. Extended proximity observation, behavioral logging, periodic formal interviews. He had done this with 4 other species. In his career, he was good at it. He stayed quiet, he stayed out of the way, and he watched. Humans, he discovered quickly, did not make staying out of the way easy. They talked to him all the time, not about important things, not at first. They talked about the food, about the temperature of the observation deck, about games they played in their off hours and music they listened to through small devices pressed against their ears. Cole Briggs would sometimes stop him in the corridor between sections just to say something that wasn't about anything, a comment on the star field outside or a question about Vilhari. Biology that came from genuine curiosity and not from any procedural need to know. Severac recorded all of it. His notes on week 3 said, humans initiate social contact at a rate approximately 4 times higher than any other species observed in extended proximity study. Contact appears non-strategic. No clear gain motive. Working theory, social behavior is reflexive rather than calculated. He thought this was charming. He was not wrong. He also was not right in the way that mattered. The card game was Cole's idea. He showed up at Severac's research room one evening with a small flat deck in his hand and the particular expression Severac was starting to recognize as the one Cole used when he had already decided something and was only now informing you of it. Poker, Cole said. You play. Severac did not play. Cole taught him. Vera sat across the small table with her feet up and a mug in both hands, watching and occasionally offering unhelpful commentary. The game involved controlled deception, hiding what you had, making the other person believe Something that was not true. Severac was, by every measurable standard, better at reading micro-expressions than Cole Briggs. The Velhari eye cluster could track 17 distinct facial movement zones simultaneously. He had spent 30 years studying behavioral biology. He lost 7 rounds in a row. He could not figure out why. Cole didn't explain. He just dealt the next hand. Vera from behind her mug, not for nothing, but he's been doing this since he was 7. Severac looked at Cole. You learned deception at age 7. I learned poker at age 7, Cole said. That's different. He dealt the cards. He did not explain the difference. Severac lost the 8th round. He put a new note in his file: human deception behavior is not detectable through standard expression reading protocols. Requires different framework. Has not identified framework yet. He underlined it twice. The death came in week 4. One of the junior human crew members, a young man named Danny Rowe, who ran ecological samples in the lower research base and who had been teaching 2 Velhari researchers to make something called a grilled cheese, received a message from home. His mother had died quietly in a bed. Old age. Severac watched from the doorway of the common room as the other humans registered this. There was no formal protocol, no structured response. They simply moved, closed in around Danny the way a tide closes around a rock, not consuming it, just surrounding it. Cole put a hand on his shoulder and left it there. Vera sat beside him and didn't say anything at all. Someone Severac didn't know well brought food from the kitchen and set it on the table, and no one asked for it. Danny Rowe cried. The humans let him. They didn't look away. Severac's working theory at the time: protective social clustering, consistent with prey species trauma. Bonding. Herd animals clustered around the injured to reduce their vulnerability. Signal. The behavior reduced predation risk for the group by keeping the vulnerable member hidden inside the mass of the herd. He wrote this. He believed it. He was correct about the behavior. He had completely misread where it came from. The escape specimen happened on a Wednesday. It was a small thing. A 6-limbed crawler from the ecological research bay, harmless by every assessment, no defensive capability, no toxins. It had slipped through a faulty seal on its habitat container and made its way into the lower corridor. The alarm was soft, not an emergency tone, just a notification. Severac was in the corridor when it happened. 3 Velhari junior researchers were with him. The crawler appeared at the far end of the passage, moving in the uncertain way of a creature that had never been in open space before. The Velhari researchers stopped. It was not a decision. It happened before any decision could be made. Their nervous systems ran the assessment: unfamiliar movement, unknown trajectory, uncontrolled variable, and halted their bodies while the calculation ran. 11 seconds. That was the standard freeze response window for Velhari in low threat, unfamiliar events. Severac counted. He looked to his left. Cole was already at the end of the corridor. He hadn't run. He was just there, moving with the long, unhurried stride of something that did not calculate whether to go toward the unknown because The calculation had been made long before this moment by something older than thought. He crouched. He picked up the crawler gently. He checked it over with the same casual focus he brought to everything. He carried it back toward the research bay. 11 seconds. That was all. Severac stood very still. He went back to his files that night. He opened footnote 14, the anomaly he had flagged in the assembly hall, the human smiles that functioned as appeasement but produced no threat. Response. He read it twice. Then he read the rest of the file. All of it. From the beginning. He read it differently this time. He found Vera that same night. She was in the observation deck, the wide curved room at the ship's nose, all glass and stars. She was sitting alone, both hands around a mug, looking at nothing in particular, or looking at everything. It was hard to tell with her. He asked if she was afraid. She thought about it. Not performing thinking, actually doing it. I'm afraid of lots of things, she said. I just don't let them drive. He sat down across from her. The stars moved very slowly past the glass. He wanted to ask, afraid of what? He wanted to ask, what does that mean? Don't let them drive. He wanted to ask, how do you go toward the crawler? How do you close around Danny like a tide? How do you sit across from a species that does not know what it is looking at and smile and bring them food and still be what the data is starting to tell me you are? He didn't ask. He went back to his room. He opened a new document. He wrote at the top, revised framework. He stared at it for a long time. Outside the porthole, the stars were very old. Some of them were already dead, and their light was still traveling. He started writing. He started at the beginning, not at the assembly hall, not at the smiling, not at footnote 14. He started at Earth. He pulled every geological record, every evolutionary study, every ecological survey his access permissions could reach. He read about the food chains, the layered predation, the species that had emerged from the planet and the species that had not. He read about the ice ages. He read about the droughts. He read about a creature, small and vulnerable, that had been hunted for most of its early history and had survived anyway, and had not survived by running farther or hiding better or breeding faster. It had survived by changing what it was. Severac sat back in his chair. The stars outside were still moving. Slowly. The dead light still coming. He looked at the note he had underlined. Twice, human deception behavior is not detectable through standard expression. Reading protocols. Requires different framework. Has not identified framework yet. He deleted, has not identified framework yet. He typed something else. He did not write it in his official file. He wrote it on a separate document he kept for his own thinking, the one he used when he needed to say things that weren't finished yet. He wrote the framework does not exist because it was never needed before. He saved the document. He closed his eyes. Somewhere down the corridor, someone was making coffee at 2:00 in the morning. Because that was a thing humans did, and the smell of it came through the ventilation, soft and warm and completely ordinary. He had 11 weeks before he had to present his revised findings to the assembly. He was going to need all of them. Krethvir were not subtle. That was the first thing. They didn't send a warning. They didn't negotiate border access. They came out of a jump point 3,000 km off the Arden Meridian's port side and opened fire without a single transmission. That was how the Kreth Veer worked. Severac knew this the way you know that. A particular stretch of road floods in. Rain from the records, from the history, from the long list of ships that had crossed into Kreth Veer transit space and not come back. They were territorial in the way that some species simply were not out of fear, not out of politics, but out of something older and more basic. They wanted what was in front of them. They took it. They had done this 17 times in recorded galactic history. Every species they had hit had scattered. The first shot rocked the Arden Meridian hard enough that Severac's water glass slid off his desk and shattered on the floor. The alarm changed tone, not the soft notification from before. This one was low and cycling, and it meant something different. He had trained for this. All crew had. He knew where to go. He went. The Velhari crew moved through the corridors in the way their species had always moved, in danger, fast, tight, purposeful, toward the nearest shelter point. No hesitation. No bunching up. Every Velhari on the ship knew their position in the emergency protocol, knew their role, knew that the correct response to a threat was to become small and hard to find until the situation resolved. 800 years of surviving by being less interesting than whatever was hunting you. It worked. It had always worked. Severac reached the sealed observation bay, his assigned shelter position, and locked the door behind him. Through the thick glass of the bay's exterior panel, he could see the Kreth V vessel. It was large. It was dark. It had the blunt, heavy shape of something that had never needed to be careful about anything. His communicator crackled. The ship's command feed opened. He heard Owen Daly's voice. Daly had come aboard 3 days ago. A logistics visit, officially. He had been quiet the whole time, the way he was always quiet, not absence of presence, just a particular kind of presence that doesn't advertise itself. He had eaten in the common room both nights. He had spoken 6 sentences that Severac had counted. He was on the command deck now. The Kreth V had sent a boarding declaration. Standard for them, a transmission that translated roughly as "we are coming in. Do not resist, the outcome is already decided." Every species that had ever received the transmission had accepted it. Daly's voice came through the feed. Even. Steady. The way a flat road is steady. You have 30 seconds to reverse your approach vector. Nothing else. No threat attached. No consequence named. Just the sentence sitting there by itself. The Kreth V responded with a second boarding declaration. Severac pressed himself against the observation bay wall and watched through the glass. His instruments were running. He was logging everything. His hands were doing the work his body knew how to do, while his mind went somewhere separate and watched itself, trying to understand what was happening. He heard Kalbrig's voice on the crew channel. Not loud. Not rushed. 3 short sentences. Then movement in the corridors. He could hear it through the walls, a kind of organized sound that was nothing like the Velhari evacuation pattern. The Velhari scattered and sheltered. This was different. This was moving towards something. He could not see Corridor 7 from the observation bay. He did not see what happened there. What he had were his instruments. The Kreth V boarding craft docked at the Ardent Meridian's port access point at 14:32 ship time. His instruments confirmed the breach. He noted it. He noted the time stamp and the boarding. Party size 11 Kreth V heavily equipped. Then his instruments started giving him readings he didn't have the right category for. Not from the Kreth V. From the human section of the ship. He ran the readings twice. He checked his calibration. The readings were correct. They were coming off the whole section, where the humans had positioned themselves, diffuse and steady like heat rising off dark stone in the middle of the day, like something that had been held at a low temperature for a long time and was now simply not being held anymore. He did not have a word for it. In the 7 languages he spoke fluently, there was not one word for it. He watched the clock. At 14:36, 4 minutes after the boarding party entered the ship, the Kreth VA boarding craft undocked. It reversed. It moved away from the Ardent Meridian at a speed Severac had not seen the Kreth VA use in any recorded incident. Not in any of the 17. Not once. The main Kreth VA vessel held position for 1 minute and 40 seconds. Then it turned. Then it jumped. Gone. Severac sat down on the floor of the observation bay. His legs had decided this was necessary. The crew channel crackled. Cole's voice. All clear. Anyone need a medic? Flag up now. A pause. Neat's got a cut on his arm. Petra, your shoulder okay? A longer pause. Good. Who wants coffee? It was not a question. Severac stayed on the floor for a moment. Longer. The glass from his water cup was still scattered near his desk. He looked at the pieces. Small. Bright. Each one catching the overhead light in a slightly different way. He got up. When he made it to the common room 20 minutes later, Vera was at the counter, with her back to the door, pouring from the machine. She had changed her jacket. The one she had been wearing was folded on the chair nearest the door. There was a dark stain on the right sleeve she had not entirely dealt with yet. She turned around and handed him a mug. He looked at her. She looked back. We're filing the incident report now if you want to add your instrument logs, she said. Yes, he said. He held the mug with both hands. It was warm. Nate Holloway was at the far table with his arm in a wrap, telling Danny wrote something in a low voice. Danny was nodding. Nate was using his unwrapped hand to demonstrate something. Severac couldn't tell what. Then Danny laughed, short and real, and Nate looked satisfied. Severac looked at the wrap on Nate's arm. He looked at the jacket on the chair. He thought about 4 minutes. He thought about 11 Cathar VA who had never been turned back in recorded galactic history, boarding a ship with 41 humans on it. He thought about the speed the Cathar V a vessel had used when it left. He thought about that speed for a long time. Can I ask you something? He said to Vera. She was leaning against the counter with her own mug. Sure. Were you afraid? She looked at him. Not the way people look when they're deciding whether to answer. The way they look when they're deciding how accurate to be. Yes, she said. He waited. Fear's not the problem, she said. Fear's just information. You take it, you use it, you move. She drank her coffee. Severak looked down at his mug. The coffee was darker than he usually made it. Someone else had poured this one. The Cathar VA have done this 17 times. He said. I know, she said. They have never retreated. I know, she said again. She wasn't performing calm. She wasn't performing anything. She was just standing in the kitchen of a research vessel that had been boarded 45 minutes ago, drinking coffee, being honest. What did they find in that corridor? Severak asked. Vera was quiet for a moment. Us, she said. She pushed off the counter and picked up her writing device from the table and went to find the incident report. Severak stood in the kitchen alone. He drank his coffee. It was, he noted distantly, the best thing he had tasted in 6 weeks aboard the ship. He could not explain why it tasted better today than yesterday. He suspected it had something to do with being alive. He set the mug down. He looked out the small porthole above the counter. Stars, the same ones as always, fixed and old, and completely indifferent. He thought about footnote 14. He thought about 11 seconds in the crawler at the end of the corridor. He thought about the way Cole's voice had sounded on the crew channel 3. Short sentences, no fear in it, no performance, just direction, like I'm telling you which way to turn on a road he has driven 100 times before. He opened his data pad. He started writing the incident log. He wrote it accurately. All of it. The timestamps, the instrument readings, the boarding duration, the retreat speed. He wrote the thing he did not have a word for and called it, in the official log, unclassified biological emission. Origin, human crew section. He would find the word later. He was starting to understand that finding it was going to chain everything he had written before. The formal inquiry convened 14 days after the Arden Meridian incident. The assembly hall was fuller than it had been for the original classification session. Severak counted delegates from 57 species. He had never seen the hall that full for anything short of a war declaration. No one called it that. They called it a review session. The agenda was polite and careful. The classification of humanity was to be reassessed in light of the Arden Meridian data. There were 17 formal discussion points, 3 scheduled recesses, a carefully worded resolution document, waiting at the end with a blank space, where the new classification category would go once the assembly voted. The Velhari block had 6 seats in the primary ring. Severak sat in the researcher's position, to the right of the main delegate cluster. His chair was smaller than the delegate chairs. He had a table, a data screen, and a glass of water he had not touched. The humans were in the visitor section. Again, same chairs, same small table, same water dispenser. But it was different this time, and everyone in the room knew it, even if nobody said so out loud. Kalbrigg sat in the middle chair. Vera to his left. 2 other Severak knew from the ship. Nate Holloway, who had a fresh wrap on his arm, and Petra Gaines, who ran navigation and said very little but noticed everything. The same 4 people. They had brought nothing to the welcome table this time. No one had asked for the food table to be removed. It was just empty. The Orvani delegate opened the session. It read through the incident report. Dates, coordinates, vessel ID, boarding. Party classification, retreat timestamp, retreat speed, flat language, the kind of language that made things smaller by describing them precisely. The room listened. Severak watched the listening. The Velhari cluster was close group, not touching but near, the way Velhari drew together without deciding to. An amphibious species from the outer rim had changed color twice since the session opened, cycling between its neutral pale gray and something darker. A stress response. Involuntary. The kind of thing a body does without waiting for permission from the mind. That owns it. A hive species in the upper tier had gone quiet, their ambient harmonics, low constant sound they produced during normal function, had simply stopped. These were not political reactions. These were bodies. Bodies that had not yet made a single conscious decision about what to think, because the part of each creature responsible for thinking was downstream of the part that already knew. The session moved through its points. Data was presented. Witnesses gave accounts. Severak's instrument logs from the observation bay ran on the hall's main display for 11 minutes. The readings were clear on the screen. The unclassified emission, the timestamp of the Kreth VA retreat, the speed. Owen Daly's statement was read into the record by a Velhari clerk because Daly had not come. He had sent 3 sentences on a plain document with no decoration and no title. The clerk read them in the flat voice of professional neutrality. The first 2 sentences established the facts of his command decision. The third sentence was, "We did not ask to be what we are. We are asking to be your allies. Choose carefully which question you answer with your vote." The room was quiet after that for longer than any procedural moment required. Then the next discussion point was called and the session continued. Severak was called to present his revised assessment in the 4th hour. He had been working on it for 6 weeks. It was 37 pages. He had rewritten the framework 3 times from a blank document. He had gone back to footnote 1417 separate times, reading it differently, each time finding new things in it, the way you find new things in a room when the light changes. He stood at the presenter's position. He began. He was thorough. He walked the assembly through the biological revision first, the forward-facing eyes considered alongside, the social bonding depth, the pain tolerance measured against the cooperative behavior, the aggression capacity set next to the emotional range. He explained how the original classification system had been built, honestly, carefully, without blame, by species whose primary evolutionary experience was avoidance. How a system built on avoidance would naturally read the absence of visible fear as the absence of danger. How that reading was wrong. He explained what Earth was, not in general terms specifically. The predator density, the competitive pressure across every level of the food chain, the geological instability, the way the planet had reshuffled everything alive on it multiple times, and the things that persisted were the things that could adapt fast enough or fight hard enough, or in one extraordinary case, both simultaneously. He got to the end of the 37 pages. He stopped. He set the report down on the table. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked up at the assembly. "I made an error," he said. Nobody moved. I was looking for the source of the danger in the correct places, the aggression capacity, the pain tolerance, the coordination under threat. I found all of those things. I cataloged them. I noted them accurately. He paused, but I identified the wrong thing as the primary concern. The room was very still. The primary concern, Severac said, is that they are genuinely kind. He let that sit. And they are kind the way a large and capable creature is gentle with the things it has chosen to protect, not instead of what they are. In addition to it, the kindness and the capacity exist in the same body at the same time, and they do not cancel each other out. They never have. He looked at Cole Briggs. Cole was watching him. Steady, patient, the way Cole watched everything, not performing patience, just having it the way some people simply have more of certain things than others. The classification category we require, Severac said, does not currently exist in assembly law. I recommend we build one. He sat down. The session continued. There were 8 more discussion points on the agenda, and they were handled one by one carefully in order. 3 recesses happened on schedule. Delegates ate their species-appropriate meals and returned to their seats. During the second recess, Severac stood near the corridor that ran along the back of the hall. He was looking at nothing in particular, holding his water glass. He had finally started drinking it when he became aware that the amphibious delegate from the outer rim was standing nearby. It had returned to its neutral gray. Its breathing was visible. "Do you believe," it said quietly, "that they are a threat to us?" Severac thought about the question. He thought about it the way he thought about most things, completely, without rushing. "I believe," he said, "that a threat and an ally are not always different things. I believe the distinction depends entirely on what we do next." The amphibious delegate looked at him for a moment. Then it went back to its seat. In the visitor section, Vera had her small writing device in her hand. She had been using it through every recess, same as always, that particular focused stillness she had when she was thinking fast behind a quiet face. Cole was at the water dispenser at the edge of the section. He filled a cup and drank it and stood there looking at the center of the empty hall floor. He had the look he sometimes had, the one Severac had first noticed in the original session and spent months trying to name. Not comfortable exactly, not watchful exactly. The particular steadiness of a person who has already made their peace with outcomes before the outcomes are decided. The final recess ended. The assembly reconvened. The vote was called. 31 for, 26 against. A new class. Category: blank space no longer blank. Protected apex species. The first of its kind in 800 years of assembly record. The category had not existed that morning. It existed now because something had happened on a corridor of a ship that Severac could not see, and what came back out of that corridor had changed the shape of galactic law. Someone had to build the category. The humans had not asked them to. The humans had simply been what they were in the place they were when the moment came. That Severac was beginning to understand was always how it had worked. He sat in his researcher's chair and looked at the blank space on the resolution document, now filled with 4 words in formal assembly script, and thought about footnote 14 and the crawler and 11 seconds and the speed the Krethvir had used when they left. He thought about the things that survive. The assembly began filing out. The hive species harmonic started up, again low and steady, filling the upper tier. The Velhari block moved together toward the exit. Severac stayed seated for a moment. Longer. He was already thinking about what he needed to write next. The vote passed on a narrow margin. The resolution language was careful, as it always was. It said pending formal species address and assembly acceptance of proposed classification framework. Humanity is to be granted provisional status under a new category designation to be named upon completion of the address. The new category did not have a name yet. The blank space in the document was still blank. The formal address was scheduled for 3 days later. Owen Daly's office sent the name of the speaker. The assembly diplomatic team read it and sent a clarifying message back politely, assuming there had been an administrative error. The speaker listed was not an admiral, not an ambassador, not a diplomat of any recognized seniority. Owen Daly's office replied, no error. Cole Briggs would speak. Severac arrived early. He had a researcher seat again to the right of the Velhari block. The hall filled slowly, then faster. By the time the session opened, it was the fullest it had been for anything in Severac's career. Not just the assembly's permanent membership, observers too, from stations and outposts that had received the session notification and found reasons to be here. All of them prey species. Everyone, some more recently than others in their evolutionary history, but the architecture of it was still therein. Their nervous systems, old as their oldest bones. Cole walked in with the human delegation. Same group as always. They took the visitor section seats. Cole set a single small card on the table in front of him and did not look at it again. When his name was called, he stood. He walked to the address podium at the center of the floor. He adjusted the microphone, built too high-sized for larger species. He pulled it down to where it needed to be. He looked out at the room. He was quiet for a moment, not gathering himself. He was already gathered. He had been gathered since he walked in. The quiet was just the quiet before. Someone speaks plainly. Then he talked about Earth. He talked about it the way a person talks about a place they know well, not selling it, not performing anything, just describing it. He said it was, by any biological standard, one of the most competitive environments ever recorded in the known galaxy. He said this without pride. He said it the way you say the winters get bad back home, accurate and old and not particularly new information to you anymore. He talked about the food chains, the layered predation, the way the planet had reshuffled everything alive on it 4 or 5 times over its long history, and the things that survived each reshuffle were the things that could change fast enough, move fast enough, or fight hard enough. Most things, he said, couldn't do all 3. He said, for most of our history we were not at the top of that. The room was very quiet. He said that humans had been prey. Not in the deep beginning, not before. They were fully what they became, but close enough to it that the memory was still in the body. You could see it in how humans moved in the dark, in the particular sharpness that came when something approached from behind. We know what it feels like, he said, to be the thing something else is hunting. He looked at the room, not at any one delegate. At all of them. We got out of it, he said. Not by luck. We organized. We remembered things across generations. We taught each other. We built tools. And slowly, over a very long time, we became the most dangerous thing on our planet. He paused. Then we almost destroyed ourselves 4 times. He said this the way you say a fact. Flat and unhurried. He mentioned his grandmother in 2 sentences that told you everything you needed to know and explained nothing. He did not explain them. We kept going, he said. He looked down at the small card on the podium. Then he looked back up. Every species in this hall learned to survive by making itself less interesting than the danger. You built something remarkable out of that. It kept you alive long enough to build all of this. He let his eyes move across the room. The tiers, the delegations, 800 years of galactic law made out of the survival instincts of creatures who had learned to be careful. We survived a different way. We became the danger. And then we decided to care about something larger than surviving. He let that sit in the room for a long moment. That is not a threat, he said. That is an offer. He reached into his pocket. He set the small card on the podium. He looked out at the assembly one more time. Earth doesn't produce prey, he said. He let the pause come. Only predators. He picked up the card and walked back to the visitor section and sat down. Vera didn't say anything. She handed him the water glass from the table. He drank. The room stayed quiet for longer than any procedural beat required. Not stunned exactly. The word for it was something else, the particular stillness of a thing that has heard a true sentence and is still in the process of absorbing it. Then the naming session convened, and the blank space in the resolution document was filled. Protected apex species. 4 words. They had not existed in assembly law before today. The category had been built this morning in this room because something had needed to exist that hadn't before. The session closed. Delegates began to move. The hive species harmonic started up. Again in the upper tier, low and steady. The Velhari block filed toward the exit. In their usual close formation. Severak found Cole in the corridor. Outside the hall. Not by plan, they simply arrived at the same stretch of corridor at the same moment. Cole had a travel container of coffee in one hand and the small card in the other. And he was finally reading it. Which meant he had not needed it at all. Severak stood beside him for a moment. The corridor's long window looked out onto the station's exterior lights, cycling down toward their evening setting, stars becoming clear in the dark beyond. What was on the card? Severak asked. Cole looked at it. He held it out. 3 words. Tell the truth. Severak handed it back. Cole put it in his pocket. They stood there a moment in the corridor, not needing to fill it. Your revised report, Cole said. Eventually. The part about kindness. Yes, Severak said. You were right about that one, Cole said. Not thank you. Not reassurance. Just you got that one correct. The way Cole acknowledged most things. Without ceremony, without extra weight. On it, Severak thought about Danny Rowe and the tide of humans closing around him in the common room. He thought about Vera in the observation deck, both hands around her mug. watching dead starlight coming in from very far away. He thought about the crawler and 11 seconds and Cole already at the end of the corridor before anyone had decided to move. I was right about almost nothing else, Severac said. You got the important part, Cole said. He finished his coffee. He looked at the stars beyond the window. Severac looked too. They were the same stars as always, old and fixed and completely indifferent to everything that had happened today, everything that had been named today, everything that had shifted in this building between morning and evening, because one man had stood at a podium with a card he didn't need and told the truth in a plain voice. Inside the hall, through the closed doors, Severac could hear the assembly beginning to disperse. Small sounds, voices, life continuing, which was what life did, in every form it took, which was the point, which had always been the point. He thought about the blank space that now had 4 words in it. He thought about what it meant that those 4 words had not existed this morning. He thought about what it meant that they existed now and what came next, and whether the galaxy was ready for what came next, and whether ready was even the right question. He thought about the Kreth VA leaving at a speed they had never left it before, and the 41 humans on a research vessel who had simply been what they were when the moment came. He thought about what Cole had said at the podium. Not a threat, an offer. Severac stood in the corridor while the station lights dimmed around him and the stars came out clear and cold in the dark beyond the window, and let the full weight of the offer settle into him, the way cold air settles into a room when you finally open the window. It was not comfortable. It was, he decided, correct. And correct was the thing that mattered most, even when it changed everything, even when it built categories that hadn't existed before, even when it meant standing in a corridor at the end of a long day next to a quiet man with an empty coffee cup, watching stars that were older than both of them by a distance neither could name. Even then, somewhere inside the ship, through a wall and 2 corridors and a closed door, Danny Rowe was teaching 2 Velhari researchers how to play cards. Severac could not hear it. He knew anyway.